John Wesley, he was confronted by a guy that was dealing with a lot of troubles and worries. And the guy came to him and said, I don't know what I should do with all this trouble and all this worry. And at that moment, John Wesley looked over and he saw a cow looking over a stone wall. Now get that picture, a cow looking over a stone wall. And John said to the man, he said, do you know why that cow is looking over the stone wall? And the man said, no. And Wesley said, the cow is looking over the wall because she cannot see through it. That's what you must do with your wall of trouble, is look over it. You see, some of you are sitting here right now. Some of you are watching right now. And you got a wall of trouble right in front of you, a wall of worries, a wall of stress. And if all you do is just look at it, it's just going to confront you all the time, and you're going to get nowhere. You're just going to be so fixed on that, and you're going to get nowhere except for a lot of anxiety and a lot of pressure and a lot of tension and a lot of suffering and stress. So you have to seek the kingdom and the king of the kingdom above. You have to look over that wall of worry. You have to look above. Just like the psalmist said, I look to the mountains. Where does my help come from? The help comes from the Lord. You have to look to the Lord. The God who has a history of goodness. And you move forward based on that. Paul, when he's writing to the Corinthians, he's telling them about his trip to Asia. And he writes to them and he says, 2 Corinthians 1:8, we think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through in the province of Asia. Trouble, stressors, yeah, Paul, anointed man of God, called by God, and he dealt with trouble too. And then look what he says here. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure. We thought we would never live through it. Well, how many of you have ever said that? I just don't know how I can do this, God. This is going to kill me. I just don't think this is going to work out. What should I do? And Paul even says here, in fact, we expected to die. They had a wall. They had a wall of trouble. They had a wall of worries. They didn't see through it in their own ability and their own understanding. So what do they have to do? Here's where they got to. And this is where the Lord wants us to get to. And we have to understand sometimes, and you might not like to hear this, but sometimes God will put us in situations, and certainly he'll use situations, but sometimes he'll put us in situations that are out of our control so that we can learn to give it to him and to trust his control. And that's where Paul got here. In verse 9 it says, but as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely only on God. And here's a kicker here, listen, who raises the dead. That circumstance brought them to stop trusting in their ability and start trusting in God's ability, who raises the dead. Notice he didn't say God who sent his son to die for us, as awesome as that is, but anybody could die. So what Paul was saying, in saying who raises the dead, is he was recalling God's history of resurrection. And in doing that, he was recalling the ability of God to do the impossible. And guess what happened? 2 Corinthians 1:10 says, God did rescue us from mortal danger, and he will rescue us again. We have placed our confidence, our trust in him, and he will continue to rescue us again. So what they did is they looked back at what God did do. They looked over their current situation to see what God could do. They expected it's what God would do, and guess what? It's what God did do. And that's what we have to do as well, is we have to look back in our histories, in our own lives and the lives of others, in our Bibles, and see what did God do. Use that to get a firm belief in what God could do, but it doesn't just stop there, because then you have to expect it's what God will do. And then here's the piece, is at that point, put yourself in the trunk of the car and sit and rest and relax and just see what God does do. Do you suffer from feeling anxious, agitated, irritable, or overwhelmed? If so, you are not alone. Unfortunately, 3 out of every 4 Christians admit to these symptoms of stress. But more important than physical suffering, stress comes between our relationships with God. It hinders obedience to God, and it chokes out the fruits of the Holy Spirit in our lives. But you don't have to suffer from stress anymore. In my 4-part audio series, Stress Relievers, I alert you to the common ways stress sneaks into our lives and then guide you through practical strategies to kick stress out. If you're ready to rise above the pressures of today to experience the abundant life that God desires for your future, then don't wait. Go online now to kylewinkler.org and order my 4-part audio series, Stress Relievers, for a donation of only $25. Shipping and handling is included. This series includes 4 stress-relieving messages: living in your grace zone, busybodies, the easy way to trust God, and the place of God's delight. Don't let stress choke out the peace of God in your life anymore. Go to kylewinkler.org to get my Stress Reliever series on 4 CDs or MP3s for a donation of only $25, and get on your way to real rest and relaxation for your body and your soul.